Hey, how's it going? What's up?
Yeah, how are you, James?
Good, good. So good to see you again, Shelby. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. How are you?
Fantastic. I'm out here in San Francisco. We've got some conferences going on. Foresight Vision Weekend. Just wrapped up SciCon. Had a legendary time. Yeah, are you in New York still right now?
Yeah, in New York, calling you from Brooklyn, so
Nice.
not quite as exciting.
Is it still snowing, or like have you guys gotten snow yet? No.
Yeah, there's been some flurries on and off for a couple weeks, but yeah, it's been just very cold. I almost
Yeah.
wish there were snow, so it would
Make it
uh,
better.
yeah,
Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
consolation for how cold it is.
Cool. Well, I'm excited that we have all of you. Smac, great to see you again. How are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Good to see you again. It's been
Yeah,
it's
gee,
been, it's been a minute since we talked, but yeah, good to see you.
totally. So I think we're live right now. So what I'm going to do is just do a quick introduction. Maybe I'll introduce myself. You guys can introduce yourselves. And then the place I want to start with is the DeSci playbook that you all published. So, all right. By now, you all already know who I am, but for those who are tuning in for the first time, my name is James. I'm the chief scientist here at Bio, chemist by training, and helping to get all the amazing science into the ecosystem and launched on the launch pad. Today, we have two amazing guests, Dr. Shelby and SMAC, both from Compound, and two folks who are incredibly DeSci-pilled. So much so that they published an interesting blog post on DeSci themselves. But before we get into it, Dr. Shelby, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. I'm a bio PhD by training, and through spending 10 years in academia, I saw very little change and also very little creativity that was ramping up. So, yeah, since I've been in venture, DeSci has been a place where I've seen net new ideas and net new ways for those ideas to be funded and commercialized. And yeah, really excited to speak more about how we see that helping the future of biotech in general.
Totally. All right, Smac, why don't you give us a little bit on yourself, who you are, and you can stay in on, but which is classic in crypto, but yeah, let
Yeah,
the audience know.
yeah. Thanks for having us again. I'm
Totally.
Smac, so I'm a partner at Compound, um, alongside Shelby. So we're a thesis-driven, research-centric investment firm, and spend a lot of time in a bunch of areas. I spend most of my time on the crypto side, and so yeah, have been in crypto in one way or another for about a decade at this point, and I think probably uh, got have been more and more DeSci pilled over the last couple of years as I've spent more time with Shelby and looking at kind of I don't know some of the ways that crypto has been successful and unsuccessful in other parts of where people are building things. And so, yeah, just super interested in seeing how kind of the science space evolves over the next call it decade. So, yeah,
Totally. What I think is super cool about the mashup that we have right here is, I mean, Shelby, you just told us that you are a PhD in the hard sciences, and Smack, you're a crypto connoisseur interested in the space. Have been working in the space for over a decade, and so it just feels like we have the peanut butter and jelly of the Psi and the D to bring the D side together. And so it was such a pleasure to see that the two of you teamed up to write this DeSci playbook. I feel like there's probably no better team or no better squad in the DeSci space as a team of investors that kind of brings both the yin and the yang together. So maybe we can just jump off right there. Can you tell us a little bit about like what inspired you to put this playbook together and sort of like what the summary is, what the thesis is? I'm sure many folks have seen it, but for folks who don't know what's up, what are you guys' take on DeSci?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Compound is a really special place to work since we are thesis driven, research centric investors across robotics, crypto, AI, and bio and health. It just means there's a lot of crosstalk between all five of us on the team all the time.
Mm,
Um, and especially as all of those worlds merge together, of course, like the canonical place in bio is AI in bio and robotics in bio. And we've invested a lot in both of those areas. Um, but yeah, as Mac and I have been talking over the years, it's actually, as a firm, we run learning together sessions where we bring
mm,
new ideas of where big company should be created. And Smac, for the past 2 or 3 years, has been really pilled on crypto in the real world and where it matters, and brought all of these amazing examples of Helium Internet, which is a crypto internet platform, a decentralized internet. Also, Hive Mapper, which is a crypto based way of mapping roads. You put a camera in your car and it helps map the world, so you can make a decentralized Google Maps. So yeah, it's really been speaking to Smac and seeing the commercial success as well as the like real world success of those platforms, and just being like, biotech is also very capital intensive. It has siloed data, but the outputs are also very valuable. So yeah, let's just pattern match to biotech instead of these other places.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think, yeah, our view is always just generally that, okay, cool, crypto is just a piece of technology that is potentially interesting and useful in like TBD what ways it's useful. Like we're seeing it's useful in ways in finance, obviously, but our view is kind of like, cool, this is probably useful away from just finance, and we think that there's other institutions that have a lot of, or will continue to have some of the I don't know, distrusts that we're seeing, whether that's the healthcare system or whether that's other types of systems. And so our view is just, okay, this is an interesting kind of technology where what problems exist today that could potentially be solved using this. And so I think, like, in talking to Shelby, obviously, she knows way more on what's going on in like traditional science and in that world. And it's like, I think for me, it's useful to bounce ideas off of her of like, hey, like what are the problems that exist, and like is this a way that can solve any of those problems that you consistently hear in kind of the world that Shelby spends most of her time. And so I think for us, it's like, cool, we've seen more and more, I think, over the years that there's potentially, yeah, areas where these two worlds are just going to keep coming more together.
Totally. I actually really like that point because I've always described crypto as a very like expressive and general purpose technology. And at Bio, we have a lot of interesting ideas of how we can use crypto either as like a bootstrapping mechanism, as a way to hold accounting of who's contributed what, as a reward function mechanism, gating, filtering, so on and so forth. And I think in the same way that we've seen crypto primitives evolve over time and just give us more and more like infrastructure and tooling that we can do, like DeFi and RWA, like you mentioned, Hive Mapper, so on and so forth. I feel like DeSci just, it kind of becomes an emergent property of using this expressive technology to say, well, where do we have problems? Science is underfunded, misclassified. There's a disconnect between the people who would like to consume said science versus the people doing said science. And so we just see that the expressive surface area of crypto lending itself well to finding some potential solutions there. And it seems like you guys agree with that. I really want to maybe drill into like what was the inspiration to kind of put a playbook together, right? So there was a lot of different examples that you all gave there. Presumably, a playbook to me would say you think we're still kind of early in the space. You're expecting that, in the same way that we're kind of arcing right now, or that space sort of had like a big opening, that there's a new opportunity for folks to kind of get involved. Yeah, maybe talk a little bit about the rationale of the playbook, why put it together, what you hope comes out of it.
Yeah. So as a firm, since we are thesis and research driven, we do a lot of writing, and the writing manifests either in long form projections of the future. Smac did an incredible crypto, 5 years of crypto projections into the future a couple years ago. I did the same for biohacking and projected what the next 5 years of biology look like through the lens of biohacking. Then we do thesis-driven posts, and then in areas like DeSci or in drug discovery, we like to write playbooks in areas that are important, but people don't fully understand. And
Totally.
we have the privilege of being investors, of seeing a lot of different people and companies trying a lot of different things, and like to merge that information together. So before the DeSci playbook earlier this year, we wrote a human evidence playbook for drug discovery companies on how they can get human evidence as quickly as possible. Because as biotech funding becomes harder and harder to raise, really the metric that people care about is human evidence. And there's some really neat ways to get it through compassionate use, trials abroad, making drugs for soldiers. And this playbook was seemingly very useful for the community. So Smac and I got thinking of like, okay, there are also unique people coming into DeSci that might not know about crypto, because I think Gen 1 of DeSci was more crypto people that are very passionate about biology. But I think what I'm seeing now is that a lot of bionative or academia native people are interested in crypto, but don't quite know how to parse that. And this playbook is a distillation of how to go about even understanding where to find people in crypto and basic things such as tokens and treasuries and things.
Yeah, I think it's all of these, a lot of the areas we spend time in are like maybe a little bit less legible than I don't know what you would consider like traditional SaaS companies or things like that, right? Like everybody kind of knows how that works. I think for us, it's like, cool, these are interdisciplinary by nature, and you just don't know where those overlaps happen, and like how do we connect people who could create great companies and just like don't know where each other are, right? Like I think that was a lot of the impetus as well, is even like Shelby and I, like we have like like very different, spend our time on very different things, but we kind of, I think it is a little bit of a manifestation of that, of like we imagine that like there are people in our world who probably can connect, that we're trying to find to make those connections, but there's definitely people out there who are interested and just like where do I like how do I even figure out what's going on?
Totally. And I think to that point, we've done a lot of education on our behalf, but we're obviously just one of many players in the DeSci ecosystem. And in the same way that I mentioned earlier, that we've sort of seen it in evolution in crypto infrastructure. And Shelby, just like you mentioned, actually, you're like, look, DeSci 1.0 was crypto people, right? It was people who were very passionate about, biotech, longevity, so on and so forth. Like DeSci 2.0 has like these new like emergence of academics. We're seeing a lot more partnerships with traditional universities. And so it's obvious to me that we're going to continue to emerge and see these new like properties or themes and even types of materials to target the right audiences that need to emerge over time. One thing that I wanted to maybe like zoom out and as we're kind of seeing the bird's eye progression here from DeSci 1.0 to this 2.0, what do you think the sort of nth state or the end state, frankly, of DeSci would look like once we kind of turn through all this in the same way that we saw, SynBio 1.0, 2.0, and now we have things like Ginkgo Bioworks?
Yeah, I mean, ideally it would be multi-billion-dollar DeSci platforms that are based around different diseases, and I guess not just being focused on valuations, but also companies that have brought drugs to market or brought new products to people and have created a community that is also enriching the next areas and next products that the DeSci companies are developing.
Yeah, I think what's super, as somebody who is more crypto focused, I think what's like super interesting to me is a world in which you like some of the things Shelby has talked about around rare diseases and just different ways of doing science that maybe would not otherwise have been done in the traditional sense. And so like less traditional ways of doing it that actually end up with results for like patients or outcomes, or it's like, cool, this would have never been done, or this wouldn't have been tried for years on end, or wouldn't have gotten to market for X number of, like, this would have taken much longer. And getting to like those types of outcomes, I think like the platform sizes end up being downstream of that, where cool, you start to solve these problems that exist, and then it's like, this becomes like a different way, and like you have proof points of, okay, this works, like what else can we try to solve this way? And then you kind of have these, in my mind, you can get like these flywheels of talent and then capital, where it's like, okay, then you get real momentum of like, this is a different way to do science.
Totally. And that actually reminds me, I think one of the pioneers in like sort of a new way to do science using crypto infrastructure is HairDAO. And like I love bringing them up every single time. First off, because no one expects like one of the early winners and evidences of like DeSci success to be a community that's funding like hair regrowth. You know what I mean? It's so random. It definitely wasn't on my bingo card, right? If you were going to ask me back in like 2021, you're like, okay, which DeSci project or what area do you think is going to like show the first success using crypto fundamentals, this sort of like decentralized network driven approach to deliver scientific outcomes? I would not have guessed collective for hair loss, right? But when we look at the data, it turns out that there's an extremely passionate community there. And these folks are so passionate that they're going off and they're buying compounds, they're buying drugs, they're buying supplements, they're buying tooling, like literally scalp stimulators, and trying them on themselves, sharing results, and therefore collecting this sort of like crowd intelligence to understand, okay, where is an efficient frontier that they can push against hair loss and mobilize people who are already, they have their skin in the game, they have their hair in the game, or the loss of hair in the game, and also they have like money in the game, to go ahead and deliver a product that everyone in that community would want to use, right? That sort of collective will, the intersection of like a passionate team, a problem that is currently not being solved. I was told by the team that like the U.S. government doesn't classify hair loss as a disease, and so therefore it doesn't get the hundreds of millions of dollars that you would for like Alzheimer's or kidney disease, atherosclerosis, etc. And so the amount of funding given by the government is like 7 figures, and these guys are able to like crowdsource that using crypto. So yeah, I totally agree that there is just such an interesting opportunity to like use these native mechanisms to bring collectives together that otherwise just wouldn't exist, and kind of thinking about what nexus is of research and sort of DeSci would particularly be important or useful that the current ecosystem doesn't support. And this reminds me of a point. So I was at SciCon yesterday, and Brian Kim from Mount Sinai made this case that like we know a lot of really good things that we should be doing, but there's almost no incentive to actually do said thing. For example, publishing null results, right? Everyone knows that experiments most of the time don't work. That's why they're experimental, because by definition, you're expecting it to fail, right? But there is no infrastructure, there's no tooling, there's no incentive for folks to publish these and to share why things aren't working out. And if we had some kind of a mechanism, I think DeSci could be the place where we design said mechanism. You could finally, through the emergent behavior of an incentive, see this useful artifact of societal information make its way to the public in order to diffuse and actually reduce wasted spending on reproducing or like going in places where we know experiments are going to fail. People don't have to run the same experiment. He was to add on to this analogy. He said, when scientists were publishing X-ray crystallography data on certain purified proteins to confirm their shape, he said he knew of pharma companies that had already done this like 5 or 10 years ago, but now these folks are getting Nature papers. They're like, oh, look, we're the first ones to characterize this. But there's just such a like information silo that you wouldn't know this is there. That of course, public scientists would have no clue, and so we end up not just wasting money on inefficiency or fraud, but in experiments that have already been done. And I think DeSci potentially could build a new mechanism amongst, of course, a lot of other things in order to kind of unearth and give value to people kind of sharing these things more publicly, in the same way that we've seen the HairDAO community very passionately share what has been working and not working for the individuals in their community.
Yeah, and I think in terms of solving known problems, another one is the amount of time for peer review. And Research Hub has done a great job of making peer review, I think 1 week from submission, also actually paying reviewers.
Yeah, exactly. Crazy.
Because it is, yeah, it is hours of work that these people are putting in. And then having, publishing the peer review at the same time as they publish the article. So yeah, I think there are all of these like inefficiencies that DeSci has shown us it's able to solve on some scale and actually deploy it in the real world. So yeah, really, really excited for the future.
Totally.
Yeah, I think and crypto is it's a really good coordination mechanism. Like that's one of the strengths of the technology. And so, I mean, you saw this kind of like the biohacking movement, right? It was something that started in a similar way of like, cool, these are people on Reddit boards. These are people in like what was not a widely like this. It was not kind of in the zeitgeist, years ago. It was people on message boards being like, hey, what are you using? Like this works for me. This is the stack I'm using. Like only recently are people is everybody kind of like into biohacking now, or it's a larger movement. And so I think you're going to see a similar thing as people push for one, like the ownership side of just like owning some of the, like, usually it comes of like problems, right? It's okay. People have hair loss and they're like, how do I fix this? Right. People have a rare disease. Somebody in the family has a rare disease and they're like, okay, how do I solve this? Right. And they feel a little bit like, okay, the existing solutions are either too slow or I'm hearing kind of the same, like they don't feel adequate. And so, yeah, I think it manifests in a similar way to kind of like the biohacking movement.
Totally. And I think like philosophically, crypto as an industry has always been about like freedom and sort of empowering the individual. And I love quoting the Balaji piece where he's like, it's easier to invent Bitcoin than it was to reform the Federal Reserve, right? It's like we the people want our own currency, like God damn it. And so we built one. And so similarly, there's just sort of been this malaise in the sort of from idea all the way through um, actually delivering outcomes to people, that full pipeline. I don't want to just call out academia. I was going to do that, but it goes from when a scientist first has a concept all the way through when we can actually experience improved quality of life to the delivery of whatever innovation that is. That entire pipeline just has gaps, it has holes, and so rather than sitting around and hoping that some centralized institution, whether it's academia or it's the government or it's some private company or it's some philanthropy or whatever the fuck it is going to come in and fix the problem. It's like, no. We the people are going to run an experiment. We the people are going to use coordination mechanisms, and we're going to, collect our intelligence, our resources, and ourselves in order to try and tackle these ourselves. So rather than waiting again for some institution to come in and fix science, to re-accelerate it, to get us back to the promised land, we're saying no, we're going to figure out how to do it ourselves. And you can feel that energy inside of these DeSci communities, which for me is really intoxicating and I really love. And it like, I think part of one of the things that for folks who have never participated in a DeSci org, like for those of you who are at home, maybe you've heard about DeSci tangentially, but you've never talked to any of like the amazing projects that are working in the space. There's this like energy inside of them that is so palpable and is so exciting. It feels like, for me, what it was like to be around a bunch of YC founders when I was in YC. Like they just have this sparkle, this energy, this like vision of what the future could look like in their eyes, and they're energized by it. And that is antithetical, I think, to a lot of the sort of like, we're just going to go along and then you can't really do much about the system that you see all across other industries that touch the kind of scientific pipeline. And so, yeah, there's something special about being able to actually make an impact, and then in the fullness of time, we'll see which are going to be the true successes. But that like creative, enthusiastic energy about science feels like it's really captured here. And actually, this reminds me of something Riva Tez said yesterday at SciCon. She was like, I haven't heard so many people use the term or the phrase "accelerate science" in a room in so many years. And so, yeah, I think that's that feeling of like, cool, we're going to figure out a better way is almost part of the fabric of the space.
Yeah. And there have been so many data breaches with healthcare data. And so I think people are also like, first of all, other people are profiting off data without anything going back to patients.
Totally.
not just people, other companies. And also our data isn't safe with those arbiters. So therefore, another way should be possible where our data is safe in some capacity, our data is safe, and the people providing it are able to benefit in some way. And something we think is really special about the DeSci moment and also where we are in science is that in the next 10 to 20 years, we will be able to sell our genome data for more than what it costs to actually get our genome data. And we see this happening with every modality, eventually protein sequence, proteome data, metabolome data, our data of how we behave in rooms or how we speak, and this multimodal data, just when the cost of collection is less than the cost than what you sell it for, is something that I think can uniquely be captured in a DeSci format and then profited from. And I think this also multimodal data will be infinitely more valuable than what Epic EHR records have on us. And I think this will be another watershed moment for the industry.
I totally agree. I'd love to maybe touch on that a little bit because I think that this concept has been something I've heard echoed a bunch of times, and so I know that this is kind of permeating through the scientific innovators' minds out in the field. One perspective on this is that the data has to have either a certain level of quality or other aggregate information, data points that would make it valuable enough for it to be worth more than the cost of let's say, genome sequencing. Do you have any intuition or thoughts about sort of, where we are now, at what point maybe we'll kind of like break even, and what needs to happen, whether from a data enrichment perspective, maybe it's like a critical mass of network data together, perhaps it's familial or it's geographic, anything there that you can kind of use to dissect how we are today, where we're going, and how we actually get to that promised land? Because I agree, I think that would be an amazing place to be.
Yeah, we did some projections a couple years ago on when the cost of DNA sequencing will reach $35 per genome. And we got to the $35 per genome by looking at 23andMe deals and just a simple math of how many patient genomes or SNP arrays 23andMe was selling and what the pharma buyers paid, and that netted out to be about $35. So yeah, then the cost curves were between 5 to 10 years from now, if I'm remembering correctly. But something that's really interesting about science is that it can happen sooner than what we think. So I think those are long, potentially longer than what it will actually be in order to get DNA sequencing at $35.
And so to be clear, you think that actually the value of the data doesn't need to change because this data is already being purchased at this price, and so really it's just the denominator that needs to fall.
Yeah, exactly.
Of the cost. That's interesting. Do you have any thought process on what variables might make the numerator improve, and how perhaps even if we did expect maybe a sublinear decrease in cost, we could still aggregate enough data together that this might be valuable for some other cohort or some other interested party? Any intuition there?
Yeah. I mean, 23andMe's big mistake as a company is that it didn't integrate health record data. That's what Tempus has done really well with its cancer sequencing and Caris Life Science as well. And they both become, fairly large companies because of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just integrating human context initially, and I think people are much more willing to share that. They didn't want to share that with 23andMe because 23andMe might sell their data to a big pharma company and they don't have any upside, which is what happened. But in a DeSci context, I think people would be more willing to share that data and interfaces like Olivia that Tempest put out. Olivia is a consumer chatbot that Tempest released in order to get people's healthcare data that aren't doing testing with them. But I mean, yeah, I could see a DeSci version of that, a chatbot that's able to, with your consent, aggregate all of your medical record data, and then staple that on to your genome data, and that would increase the numerator pretty significantly.
Totally. No, I agree with that. And then you can imagine, for example, if you had blood biomarkers that would be uploaded at some frequency, even if it's your annual, your health checkup, right? And not to mention what happens when people do their own personal, blood testing with products out there like blood test kits. They're becoming, so popular, so ubiquitous from companies like Superpower or Cyfox. I mean, frankly, I know there are people even working on continuous like blood meters, sort of like continuous glucose meters, but that would measure all kinds of different biomarkers 24/7. So yeah, I think there's so much surface area for this to continue to expand and for the numerator to grow, that it's almost like the opportunity just is looking for someone who's ambitious enough to come down and pluck it. So if there's any excited founders out there that kind of like this idea, you should both reach out to me and Shelby, and I'm sure we'd have a long time. We enjoy jamming with you. Actually, maybe a last question there, and then I'll change topics. Maybe you could describe, just in this case, you mentioned there was a chatbot where people would kind of engage with it. Is the idea that folks would just go ahead and kind of like upload their data and like click a box that said, I promise that this is my information and you promise you won't sell it? Or would the chatbot kind of ask them questions, so it wasn't just like you would take screenshots of your my chart, whatever it was, in order to share your information?
Yeah, the chatbot that Olivia had, that Tempest has, called Olivia. It's a chatbot that you can use to get medical advice for whatever your needs are. But in order for it to have the right context, they have to pull your data from Epic and all of the other EHR data platforms.
So smart. Bravo. Well done.
So yeah, I think something similar would be possible with a DeSci company. And as long as people give consent, you can pull their EHR records and aggregate those, and then have real-time context on those people as well, regarding what their symptoms are and what they're talking to the chatbot about.
Definitely. And presumably, if you add enough value to the chatbot, this would be the kind of thing where folks are using it over, an undifferentiated LLM from a mainstream research lab, like an Anthropic or ChatGPT, et cetera. That's really cool. That's awesome. Okay. There are so many other things that I want to talk to you guys about that unfortunately we're going to have to turn the page here. So you guys are early stage venture capitalists. Obviously, Compound is a well-known name in the space for anyone who's been looking at investing in or building in deep tech for some time now. I was hoping we could talk a little bit about how you guys are digesting or thinking about what is considered able to be funded at sort of a pre-seed or a seed stage, where we typically see startups that would come out of an accelerator or go to apply to one, versus the latent scientific research that gets done, whether by an academic in university or by a researcher in an independent lab, or maybe it's even like a biotech person that during their free time, their off time from work, has this kind of like inkling of an idea. We know that these early stage research projects are sort of like TRL, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, whereas like startups tend to have a little bit more mature technology. Those are the kinds of things that you see. How do you sort of think about the level of appropriateness there? What de-risking looks like, how someone might be a good fit for you? I'll just kind of let you guys take that however you want.
Yeah, as a firm, we invest in deeply technical areas and something we call applied research organizations. And what our companies look like are a range of idea stage companies at the pre-seed side that have excellent expertise in the different threads that would make that company work, or are spinning out and but still have some deep technical work to do before it's actually applied in the technology is applied in the real world. So for us, we're perfectly fine taking technical risk, and uniquely can help companies navigate commercial idea mazes, because if you're building something entirely new, you normally have to do the hard work of figuring out a market. So
Totally.
one of our companies that's not DeSci, but has done a great job at doing this is Orbital Materials. They are an AI company that make green materials for data centers, and have done a great job of building out products for data center. Well, building out new materials, net new materials, which is step number one.
Let's go, chemistry. Hell yeah.
Yeah. We can do that. And then with these materials, they have also found that the highest value, highest market, fastest growing market to actually slot them into.
Data centers.
And that joint understanding of what can really unlock this fast growing vertical that needs better coolants or carbon capture is an example of a flavor of type of company that we like.
Totally. And so, like you're saying, look, there was technical risk. Could they even fabricate some novel materials? Do they have the right material engineers on their team? And then there's also market risk of is there someone that wants to buy this? And lo and behold, they found out, like you're saying, data centers have some sort of constraints or performance optimizations that this kind of neatly plugs right into. I love hearing examples like that, and not just because I studied chemistry materials in undergrad, but I think that there is so much power in the opportunity or in the scientific process of invention that oftentimes it just takes someone who's willing to figure out whatever it is they need to do in order to get this into the world and to make an impact. I find DeSci and venture to just give them sort of like a boost and an accelerant. And so the missing ingredient here, I think, is just like the will or the courage to persevere no matter what, to figure out the path, and the grit to walk through the fire and step through all the glass. But if you're working on something that can make a really big impact, there's so much support and so much love for you on the other side, and it doesn't matter sort of what industry you're in.
The one thing I'll say related to that too is just the iteration process, right? If you can speed that up of cool, we run an experiment, it works or it doesn't work, or we have learnings from it, the faster you can kind of get that cycle moving. And it's cool, you're learning at a more rapid rate. And that tends to, from our perspective, that there is some correlation there of pace of learning into what we see from the most successful companies.
Well, actually really glad you brought that up, because the Elonism that I constantly I'm reminded by is that it's way better to make 10 times more decisions, even if your error rate increases by 10%, simply because you'll expand on your learning so much more quickly, and most of your errors you can actually go ahead and reverse. And Brian Chesky says something similar. He's like Brian Armstrong. He's like, you have to just keep producing more information. If you don't know what to do, just do something, right? Action and momentum produces data, and then you can kind of go from there. So yeah, to your point, people just have to constantly keep iterating. And what's also cool is this reminds me of a point Dave Freeberg made in response to a tweet of mine, which is, scientists already have this innate talent of using the scientific method. And it turns out you can use that scientific method mindset of running experiments to iterate your way to a solution. But in the case of finding products to bring to market, not just experimental results or novel hypotheses you have to bring to material reality. So I think scientists are actually uniquely equipped, and they just have to believe in themselves that they can actually change the world. Cool. So many more things. Oh my God. All right. Well, maybe at a high level, we can kind of zoom out and talk a little bit about the way you all have seen sort of biotech and R&D change over the past 5-10 years. I know specifically there's a lot of new changes in the current administration with regard to supporting science, to supporting R&D. I think that this is made for a really useful opportunity for folks that are providing alternate, non-academic affiliated sources of capital to support, really important scientific research. But curious, to get your sort of lay of the land of how you've seen things change over the past, 5-10 years, and kind of where you expect things to go. So for folks that are trying to, skate to the puck of innovation, where should they be aiming towards?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, part of the reason we have been interested in DeSci is because academia hasn't materially changed in 10 years, except maybe
Totally.
in the past year when there were massive funding cuts.
Mm-hmm.
And in a world where science innovation should be speeding up on every layer, it just seemed like really seems like less and less of a place to learn good practices and sense of urgency that could actually help build something very large. Um, so yeah, I think like you said about the Elonisms and Smac was saying about feedback cycles, it's just understanding where you as a scientist can learn the most quickly. I think even before DeSci, this was a scientist joining a startup company and seeing how quickly you had to work, how every experiment also has to have a value towards the bottom line of the company and has to be working towards an inflection point. And then yeah, I guess now there's startups or DeSci that people could work in that both move quickly and I think are building towards the future and in a lot faster ways than academia.
For sure. Yeah, I actually am glad you brought that up because there's I think a tension, and Smack, maybe you've seen this as well yourself, where crypto is very addicted to quick wins, very short-termistic, very like high dopamine. And like science, on the other hand, we know takes time. Obviously, there are folks that kind of abuse that and they're like, oh no, trust me, fusion is coming in 5, 10 years, and it has been for the past 50 years, right? So there are opportunities where that doesn't make sense, but obviously, moving bits happens at hundreds of thousands of times faster than the speed of moving atoms. Um, so how do you think about sort of the disparity or the gap or the tension between sort of the crypto short-termism and the need for constant information and moving 24/7? And by the way, that's finance in general, but crypto is just a layer on top of that, right? Versus sort of the long-termist, more slow-moving, methodical, and the need to take the right path, um, thinking in science and how to kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think especially I do think that's a problem today in crypto is the short-termism, and I think part of
Totally.
that is just when you have a token prices out there, it's just distracting.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so like whether it is what like it's human nature that you have this like almost real-time scoreboard all the time, which is very unique to crypto. And I
Yeah.
think it's distracting for teams who are trying to build. And so it's distracting for the people, the community also at the same time. And yeah, I think it's like a unique challenge
Yeah.
that isn't there with maybe traditional company building. I think when you think of just like traditional startups that don't necessarily have that, right? They're
Mhm.
private and you don't necessarily like you directionally know, hey, things are working or things are not working or we have momentum.
Totally.
And you can kind of focus much more on like what you're doing and the market you're chasing versus this kind of outside scoreboard, which I think is really disruptive. And
Hmm.
and part of that is I think part of the reason that we often see like there was in the early days of crypto, there was this idea that you had to decentralize like immediately,
Totally.
which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
also very at odds with the idea of building the successful startup where it's,
Yep. Yep.
hey, like we don't need everybody making like we don't need to be asking every single person in the world to help us make this decision to move the company forward. Like you're supposed to be
Hmm.
moving fast. And
Totally.
so that's those like two tensions I think are definitely unique challenges, and in some ways they're a little bit of an own goal where like our
Mhm.
view is that actually you should be centralized in the early stages and like the core team should be making decisions around like getting feedback obviously, but you do want like a core team who's making these decisions where you're like, hey, these are the people we trust to kind of move this organization forward. And I think a lot of times crypto finds like I don't want to say it's too idealistic, but it is just like
Yeah.
it's like not seeing the forest for the trees, where it's like,
Yep.
hey, the goal of this is to like solve this difficult science problem. The goal is not to immediately decentralize and then hope we solve the problem.
Totally. And like you're saying, in the sort of reality that crypto brings, we have all these unintended second order consequences. And so people that are entering this space kind of need to be aware that, you're going to be distracted by a constant token price. Like there are people who are literally just in the space to be flipping and that treat you like a lottery ticket, as opposed to, and they want to gamble on you as opposed to thinking about how can they be a long-term holder. And I think, all of us have participated in venture capital. We understand that in many ways, VC funds having a 10-year time horizon is actually a feature, right? And that allows you to kind of guide a project to make the long-term best possible decisions, as opposed to sort of being reflexive in short-term needs. And in the same way you often see with many public companies kind of just needing to react to like quarter-to-quarter earnings. You get that dynamic as well in the earliest stage of scientific research, which can be distracting and can actually lead, I think, inexperienced teams or people that aren't prepared for this astray. So I'm glad you brought that up. And in that vein, I think that's something that folks often talk about with crypto is the sort of like double-edged sword of, you're able to, on one hand, raise financing in a decentralized way, permissionlessly, whenever anyone wants to. You can contribute and participate in sort of the future of a vision that you believe in. But on the other hand, just as easy as it is to aggregate capital, it's just as easy to lose said capital. And you see, liquidity being drained from projects before they have product market fit. And so I'm wondering how you guys think about, aligning the incentives here in order to keep projects like focused on the long term, kind of building from the best first principles we know that have worked in venture, and like what you all would do or advise projects that are trying to build in DeSci, but not be hurt by the sort of consequences or second order effects of being tied to the crypto ecosystem.
Yeah, I think I think I think a lot of those points are valid and unique to crypto. And I think like our view is generally, we wrote a little bit about this, but our view is generally that, especially as we're thinking from the venture side, like the core team it needs to be aligned for the long term. Like
Totally.
you need to have the feeling of, cool, that these people, one, are capable of solving a difficult problem, two, will stick around, because inevitably, like hard problems to solve, you don't solve them right away. Like it takes
Totally.
time, and you're usually banging your head against the wall.
A lot of iterations. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing though, the other thing there is, I think our view is we should also be aligned to be long-term focused. And so
Absolutely.
like there are ways you can obviously do this, of course, with how you think of like locking tokens for long term, which I think is an important feature.
I agree.
Because there was a debate recently about whether tokens should be unlocked or locked immediately.
Oh yeah, I saw that on Twitter. Yeah.
And it's like, I think people try to paint too broad of a brush. Like nothing. Like, for something like DeSci, you're not looking for price discovery. Like you're looking for that's not the goal here. We're not trying to like price this thing immediately. We're trying to coordinate capital and run experiments to solve problems. And so I think it's very different. So I think like long-term alignment is super important. And our view is generally like, hey, we as investors want to be locked up as well. Like we want this to be a long-term thing that we're kind of all like rowing in the same direction for. And I think it's a question we get a lot from people who are thinking about building in DeSci is this question of how do I deal with tokens? Like what is this thing? First of all, like, do I need one? How does this work? I've heard from other people, this is what I should do. Like, what do you guys think? And so I think, our view is one, I think generally I'm of the belief that that is like the longer you can prolong it or the more you can lock it up, the more important, like it alleviates all the problems we talked about around distraction. And I think like an example of this, if you think of kind of, again, traditional companies, I don't think anybody would think it's a good idea if like the early team for a startup had immediately liquid, like, you know, their shares were liquid all day long immediately, like 6 months into
You
like
mean the
starting.
2017 ICO meta? You think you think we should have learned something from that?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. And I think that while we are learning a lot of the best practices here, I think that there's still a lot more learnings to be had. And you know, scientific research is its own asset class, that will have, you know, some things that are unique to it that are unlike, you know, a pre-seed or seed stage company. And it's something I always try to tell people is like you have to make sure you find the right vehicle for what you're doing, right? DeSci is just introducing a new vehicle to the space, and there are pros and cons to DeSci, of course. There is in the same way, for example, if you're going to stay in academia and raise an academic grant, there are pros and cons. There's the rules of the road. There are best practices with writing a grant, getting it accepted, paying university their overhead, right? And depending on who you are and what you're trying to do, that might be your best possible path. Or if you're trying to create a nonprofit and raise from philanthropists, or if you're trying to do the whole venture thing, you know, do you just raise a bunch of small angel checks, for example, or do you go try to raise a massive round from a well-known fund? All of these are different contexts that may or may not be the right answer, depending on who you are and what you're trying to do. And what I do love here is that DeSci brings in just another way, another angle, a new player to this potential buffet or menu that folks can pick from in order to bring their work to life. And you know, there's a lot of work I think that needs to be done with kind of bridging that divide between the sort of like short-termism that you see inside of crypto. I think particularly in the more recent, like, you know, meme coin kind of gambling meta that we've seen, with just the reality of how long it takes for science to be done. And the only way forward is to continue to iterate and try a bunch of new experiments. Um, yeah, cool. So as we kind of, you know, we have maybe like 8 minutes left till the hour, and I know you all are very busy, so we're going to let you go promptly and on time. I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit about what your hopes are for projects that you'd like to see emerge on the space? You know, do you have any requests for different things or particular assets, ecosystems, narratives that you would love to see people go ahead and tackle or build on?
Yeah, I mean, you guys have done such a comprehensive job already. I mean, if you would have asked
Thank
us a
you.
year ago, we would have said skin, we would have said pain management, we would have said rare disease, and you've tackled all of those things. The other places where, in general, we're interested in is, I guess Cerebrum DAO is doing this to some extent, is cognitive enhancement, or I
Totally.
guess nootropic style,
Them too. Yeah.
muscle. Yeah, I think muscle, anything aesthetics or cognitive related are very interesting to us. And then also autoimmune diseases
Mm,
and tracking those, because that's where we've seen a lack of products, drugs that work in the main system, or long feedback cycles to understand that, and high patient engagement.
totally. Totally. And I think peptides are having their day in the space, particularly because of that sort of human enhancement aspect. And actually, a big topic that I heard come up multiple times yesterday at SciCon was neuroimmunology, right? So understanding how the brain's um, defends itself, adapts to, reacts to, you know, outside damage, and the unique aspects of the brain's immune system, I think, are particularly hot topics these days. And that being said, if any of this resonates with you, if you're looking to build any of that, Bio as always is looking for exciting research projects. You guys know you can reach us at bio.xyz/scientist to learn more. But I think on the side of all of that, I see an opportunity here to learn from, you know, the best practices of what academia has done right, what sort of research labs have done right, what, you know, deep tech startups have done right. I'm wondering if you all could share maybe like a playbook or a TLDR of like what are the things that, you know, when you talk to a project, you're like, okay, they have to do these things, or if they don't, like instant red flag, or like, what are the clear green flags for, deep tech or DeSci projects that you're like, cool, like we know this one's going to win. And oftentimes it's really helpful to have you all kind of share what your insights are, because we tell our scientists all the time, and they need multiple people to kind of give them that same information for it to stick. I think that's sort of like a consequence of how the human mind works sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's high user engagement, high unmet need, and user engagement is like Reddit boards, Discord forums, um, high unmet need in some area, and a unique scientific way to solve that, or to have better feedback cycles for testing interventions. And then, Smac was talking about earlier, long-termism and long-term views about aligning incentives regarding token holders, whether that means doing a token launch after the initial inflection point, or having very long lockup periods for the initial investors and operators in the DeSci company. But yeah, I think that confluence of high unmet need, fast feedback cycles, and then long-term alignment are the main things we look for.
I think also, like, when we talk to people, oftentimes our view, especially super early, because like we're happy to talk to people literally as soon as they have an idea about something, and they're just like, hey, I just want to bounce this off you. I'm not thinking of starting a company or any of these things. Like our view is generally, like you said, DeSci, like this may be the right route, but it also may not be. And so a part of those conversations are often like, does it make sense? Like, is this the best way to build the company you're trying to build? And sometimes it is, and that's like the unique insight of, hey, I actually think this is the way I should be building it. These are all the reasons for that. This is the problem, and like it's uniquely solved because of this, or it's easier to solve, or
let's double click on that, Smac. So in what cases actually do you think projects are uniquely well suited for the DeSci playbook versus times where people should stay, in TradSci or normal Rails? Like what are your opinions there of what makes a project right versus wrong for DeSci?
Yeah, I think often that like one is like the coordination. I think the global coordination is like a big deal, and whether that's like data sharing, whether that's capital formation, where it's like speed of capital formation matters a lot.
Totally.
Those are like the two main ones off the top of my head. But I think like oftentimes it's a symptom. It's this, like, it's getting pushed from where it's almost like a last resort people have seen to treat this as. Like when you think of the HairDAO guys, like, they're an example of that. They're like, look, well, I've tried to do all of these things, and like nothing has, like, these things are not working, and this is not getting funded. And so I'm going to build a company to do this, like, because they've uniquely felt like the pain of that problem. And they're like, all right, I've kind of tried all of these avenues, and like nothing's getting solved. This problem exists.
Totally. So I actually, this reminds me of something. So I talked to Stephen Wolfram last night as well, and he said this piece that I really loved, which was, scientists or technical people are really good at using their brains in their domain, but for some reason they just like turn their brains off as soon as they leave their domain. So it's like, okay, you're a chemist, you're really good at using your brain to think first principles about chemistry, but the moment you come across a business decision, it's almost like you forget that you have this analytical tool. So oftentimes his advice to the people he works with is, well, just use your brain, like actually think about it, And so I think, funnily enough, that would also be the advice that I give to folks. It's like, look, think about if like what the right vehicle is for you. Kind of do your research, reach out to folks like myself, like Smac, like Shelby, read their playbook, and just be very intentional about what you're doing, why you're doing it, what the right vehicle is, how success, what that's roadmap it is that you can demonstrate to get there, and by like using your most valuable asset, which is your brain. If you are a scientist, you can kind of work your way through what the right path is, and don't like realize, or don't forget, sorry, that you can use your brain, answer questions if you just think about them hard enough. Okay, maybe that's a good place for us to end. I just want to remind everyone that if you are interested in doing things in DeSci, we would love to help you out at Bio. You can reach us at bio.xyz/scientists. If you want to find me on Twitter, I'm at James Sinka. Smac, Shelby, why don't you guys give yourself a quick plug before we close this one down? And thank you so much again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks again for having us, James. You can reach me at Shelby at compound.vc or me also on Twitter at Shelby Newsad.
Yeah, I'm Smac at compound.vc. You can find all of our writing also at compound.vc. So
this has been a really great chat. Thank you so much, guys, and keep yourselves tuned over here for all of the amazing DeSci content. We will make sure we include a link to your playbook. And of course, as always, thank you so much for your interest in making science amazing, accelerating it, and fixing the world's biggest problems. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.